Over a decade, I've spent a few hundred hours inside polling places and ballot processing centers across the South, watching volunteers feed ballots through tabulators, seal boxes with tamper-evident tape, fluorescent lights and folding tables, and people who show up because they believe it matters. On January 29th, 25 FBI agents descended on Fulton County in the Atlanta metro area. They seized 700 boxes of ballots from the 2020 election. Ballots counted 3 times, including by hand. Ballots the Republican governor and Republican Secretary of State both certified as legitimate. The director of national intelligence flew down personally. Ballot storage has nothing to do with national intelligence. So why was she there? Meanwhile, DHS sent Minnesota a message. Turn over your voter rolls or ICE stays. Non-immigration enforcement. Ransom. This is how it works. You create a pretext. You seize things, ballots, voter data. You make people believe something is being investigated, something's up. So you can later say, see, there were questions. The same strategy behind the fake electors in 2020, behind the extortion of Ukraine, create a pretext, confuse the public, manipulate the outcome. Fulton County in Georgia is where Trump said, I just want to find 11,780 votes. Now, they didn't find them, and now they're seizing the evidence that proves they weren't there. While we watch whatever spectacle comes next in the Trump reality show, they're laying the groundwork to overturn any election they don't like.
Welcome, everyone, to Signal Fire. I'm Lisa Senecal, and I am here with my co-host, John Zieger. I'm also here with our guest today, who is David Pepper. He's the author of Laboratories of Autocracy and also Saving Democracy. He is also the former chair of the Ohio Democratic Party. He is a pro-democracy advocate and activist, and he is the newly announced, still pretty new, Democratic candidate for the Ohio Lieutenant Governor. He's on the ticket with Dr. Amy Acton, who's running for governor. Thank you so much for taking the time, David, to be with us.
Thank you. Good to be back with you in my new hat on.
We're very excited to learn what's going on in the race, and a little bit about your ticket mate. It's been about 3 weeks now since you joined the ticket. Different in Ohio than it is here in Vermont. We don't have a ticket for governor and lieutenant governor, so we tend to have people of different parties holding both positions. But her opponent in Ohio is Vivek Ramaswamy, a guy who is basically a creature of national politics. He ran for president, built a profile on cable news and podcasts. It's long been said that all politics is local, but now we're seeing more of these sort of political manufactured creatures from the federal level or a national level run for state office. And they don't seem to have a whole lot of connection with the people or the politics of the state that they're running in. Is all politics now becoming federal, national?
I mean, in a way it is. But I think in this case, and in other cases too, and you saw this in some other states in recent years, it doesn't always work very well. And maybe sometimes it does, but I do think there's a real contrast in this race that, I'll just say as a backdrop, I was really excited to join as lieutenant governor and was watching this even before I joined, but I'll say it now as the lieutenant governor candidate. There has been a real contrast. You've got a guy who looks like he's kind of searching just for national celebrity. He's supposed to be running for governor, but he's flying around on this corporate jet, which apparently he spent $500,000 of campaign funds on. If I were a donor, I wouldn't like that very much. And sometimes he's off at Turning Point USA conferences all over the country. He's often flying to New York, Fox News appearances. He did a billboard against Mondami, bizarre, with his face on it. And then you have on our side, Dr. Acton, and I drive an F-150 truck all over Ohio. She's in a Jeep going town to town. And that contrast is really sticking. And I do think, we'll talk about it, but despite Vivek having so many advantages in terms of money and that he's on Fox whenever he wants, the entire year, he's never gone up, and it actually looks like he's gone down. And he spent millions in the beginning on TV with advertising, I believe. And despite all of that, he is basically at this point at best tied, and Dr. Acton Amy is up 15 to 20 points with independents. And so I do think this sort of more local, an Ohio woman, a doctor, not a politician entree, versus this sort of hard to kind of figure out national celebrity. You know, he runs for president, then he's like part of Doge, and then he wanted to be a senator. Now he kind of runs around like a national talking head. I don't think Ohioans can figure out who he is, and also why would they want to be governor versus this person who's coming in the exact opposite direction.
It's a good bridge to the kind of a topic we wanted to get your thoughts on, because I think you do a particularly good job of connecting with people and telling real stories. I think some of the videos that you've done in the past, where you're like, on a street in a town that's been hollowed out in Ohio, and sort of telling some of the impact of some of the economic policies, I think those are really impactful. But there's a consistent criticism of Democrats generally that they're kind of all head and no heart, that they don't know how to communicate with people. And I wonder, and maybe, you started to address some of it there, but maybe say a little bit more about how you're connecting on a human level with people. How do you reach them in ways that, frankly, Republicans have been very good at reaching, of telling stories that connect, and I think Democrats often have not. How are you doing that?
Yeah, I would say in this case, this is where Dr. Acton is such a unique candidate, that she, and for those who don't know, in Ohio, beyond Ohio, they may or may not know her. I think this is going to be a race that people are going to really start watching closely if they're not already. But she became a household name in Ohio because during COVID, she was the doctor in the white coat standing next to a Republican governor, helping people get the information they needed to make important decisions to stay safe. And she did it in a way, to your question, in a way that was, and I didn't know her. I was the Democratic chair watching the Republican governor, but she cut through because she had this very unique kind of professional, steady, empathetic, authentic leadership that just, and I felt it. I didn't know her, but I felt it, that just connected with people. Like, this is a woman, a doctor, not a politician, trying to help. And it skyrocketed her to, little girls dressed up for her as Halloween all over the state. I mean, people made their own yard signs
so great
about her. There were bobbleheads. And I think it goes to your point, John. She wasn't trying to be sort of, debating with facts, although she knows the facts, she knows the data. There was some kind of, she built a bond that went to the heart with a lot of voters in a nonpartisan way. And she has a grace about her also that really connected. So she built a real bond with voters in a way that I think is very rare in politics. And I think that's what's made her stand out so much. And to the extent some Democrats, we spend more time kind of debating facts and laying out policy papers, and we'll be talking about policy and facts too, but that initial bond that's more of a gut level, heart level connection than just your typical politics, I think is very strong. And that's why we've seen in recent months, one poll that was done, it was sort of a Trump plus 10 poll, but we asked about job approval rating. She had by far the highest net job approval rating at plus 10 for a job she did 5 years ago, above everyone else of all parties.
Yeah.
And I think, John, it's because of your initial question. Like, she connected with people on a much more emotional gut level than your typical political person of either party, and then often your typical Democrat. And I think that's what's got her started in such a good way. Now, the goal is you got to keep that going, and the other side will try and change that. But that initial entree is truly unique in politics.
Yeah, that's fascinating given where the Republican Party has gone on COVID since she was no longer acting in that role. To still have retained that really positive feeling with her is really interesting. It's wonderful that she is able to reach out to independents and have more of a nonpartisan relationship with a lot of people in the state. But we know partisan politics is absolutely unavoidable.
Right.
And it's certainly going to be a big issue where you are. We saw one example of the way this is playing out yesterday, that the FBI It went into seize ballots in Fulton County, Georgia, which is in the Atlanta area. This is the county that Trump, still insists that was stolen from him, even though the Republican governor and the Republican secretary of state said that there was not voter fraud and that, the ballots were counted 3 times, counted by hand, certified. There's just nothing more to be arguing over here. This is settled, but it's not settled for Trump. How much does this concern you? And how do you think this potentially plays out in Ohio, in other states? Because obviously Trump is not going to be hesitant about trying to put his foot on the scale.
This is my non-candidate life more than my candidate life, but it should concern everybody. That scene, we were just reading that some of both the FBI, I think the leader there, one of them stepped aside just in the last few weeks. There was some discomfort. And I think it means that people running anywhere need to be thinking about this. I mean, one, the best way to avoid this stuff mattering is to win by enough that it doesn't matter. And a lot of this stuff, if they do something, is somewhat at the margins. And I don't know what they're going to do, but that Atlanta story is a worry. The Minnesota letter from Bondi about hey, we'll stop doing this if you hand over voter information is a worry. And I think one goal is, look at how Spanberger and Mikey Sherrill won. You're not going to mess with those results because they were decisive. And I do think that maybe puts a premium on win by more than you ever thought you need to, just to avoid it. The biggest risk, I think, is the voter data somehow being used to eliminate certain voters from the rolls that they don't know they're being eliminated. That's my biggest worry. That somehow there's something, late summer, fall, where people are removed and then they show up to vote and 1 out of 10 somehow are told, oh, sorry, you can't vote. I mean, that to me is one of the things I worry about. So I think it's going to be incumbent on campaigns, state parties, and others to really work the summer and fall, keep an eye on the voter rolls, and really encourage every voter to check their registration all the way through. Because when I see this idea that lists are, and good for Democratic governors and AGs, when they've been demanded to vote these voter data, they've refused and they're generally winning in court. But states like Ohio, they're not doing that. They're giving it over. And the worry would be, and we've seen a lot of purging in Ohio for the last 10 years. And I have gotten calls from people, hey, I tried to vote. I wasn't on the rolls. I didn't know it. So I think we all have to be watching the voter rolls in particular and making sure voters themselves are ensuring that they are still registered as they think they are, and not all of a sudden finding themselves not on the list, show up on election day, and it's too late to do anything about it.
You would think that there would be some sort of zealousness, regardless of party, at the state level for protecting the state's prerogatives, the state's voter rolls, those kinds of things. But national partisanship, national politics seems to really dominate there. It's interesting to look at what's happening in Minnesota right now, where we had a prospective Republican candidate for governor actually pull out of the race because he didn't want to be associated with the sort of the abusive tactics of a Republican federal government. You have a way in which it seems that the facts on the ground are making people break out of the national partisan frame to some degree. I don't want to say completely, but it seems to be changing in some ways. I wonder if you think, as the federal government becomes increasingly heavy-handed and abusive under this administration, if that creates, in a way, a bit of an opportunity to get people to re-examine the kind of the way that they've thrown all in for the kind of national partisan story that has been dominating local politics.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would combine that with a sense of broken promises. That right now, let's be very clear. You travel across states like Ohio, just like you saw in Virginia, New Jersey. The topic is costs of everything. Dr. Acton will talk about. You start seeing childcare, health care, property taxes, more debt. We saw a report the other day, higher and higher credit card debt. People just are overwhelmed. And to the extent that the last election was about solving that cost issue, and it hasn't been solved, then you have candidates like Vivek Ramaswamy saying these are perceived cost increases. Trump saying yesterday that housing, he wants it to be higher. I really do think it's both a sense from voters who might be in Ohio. We voted for Obama twice. We voted for Trump twice. And there's sort of a reaction to the last set of broken promises. There's not only sort of the broader environment, which I think is creating some bipartisan opportunity, because some of what we're seeing is so over the top, but I also think it's also the day-to-day issues of, hey, we were told that the costs were going to be solved. They're not only not being solved, but we're being told by people like Ramaswamy that we're imagining this stuff. It's not real. It's like a hoax. And I think all of that is giving. I mean, we run into Republicans all the time who will not vote for Vivek Ramaswamy. Independents clearly are looking at Amy Acton as a viable candidate. And a lot of that is just thinking, well, I voted for one set of people and they say they're going to solve it. And I don't think it's not because she's necessarily even a Democrat. It's because she's new, she's on the ground, and she looks like she's going to take on these issues in a way that they feel like others who might have made those promises just haven't. So all of that is giving, I think, opportunity. I mean, it was interesting that one candidate dropped out and said, oh, I couldn't win here as a Republican because of what they've done here. You know, Ramaswamy in the last month has said that Medicaid and Medicare were mistakes. I don't know if you saw that. He told Ezra Klein they were mistakes. Then he said the costs were perceived. He and the Senate candidate both said, hey, the way we're going to solve your cost issues, you got to go make more money. All this stuff is just so out of touch. And I think it's adding up to alienate a lot of people, including people who are sometimes in the more moderate Republican lane, but sometimes actually quite to the right, who aren't looking at a guy flying around on a 35,000 feet in a fancy jet. It's the guy who knows anything about their life versus the doctor who grew up in tough circumstances in Youngstown, who feels far more connected to their life. So I do think there really are some openings right now. And obviously the goal of a good campaign is to act on those between now and November.
Well, this sort of links to what you talk about all the time, that Democrats need to be running everywhere, because there are those opportunities in every red state. There are a lot of Democratic voters and there are a lot of independent voters. Can you talk to us a little bit about, first of all, what it means to run everywhere and what that impact is, but a little of the history of why the Democrats stopped doing that. And now that some of that is being done again, what are the successes that we're seeing and where should we be looking at next?
I started writing these books. The one was called Laboratories of Autocracy, and then I expanded on it, and I got obsessed with the fact that gerrymandering is terrible, but we make it far worse when we then don't run in half the places. It really starts to be a non-democracy in many of these states, and at the state house level, where most of the damage is done, far more than DC feels bad, but it's largely dysfunctional. Most things, just nothing happens there. State houses are passing law after law, and in many states, until very recently, we literally let half the people who were passing them run uncontested. And once that starts happening, there's a disconnect with the voters, turnout suffers, and our side has no message in half of America. We're not only not getting the vote out by knocking doors, we're not talking to anybody. And to me, and I started saying this, and people actually initially said, David, you need to calm down about this. You're making us look bad. I said, I'm glad we can't do this anymore. It has failed to leave half of this country, not even uncontested, unaddressed. They don't even hear from us. And so the good news is, in recent years, a new generation of party leaders, but also a lot of grassroots groups have started to push to make sure we run everywhere. So we now, in Virginia was a great example. North Carolina in 24, they had candidates in every district in Virginia, almost every district in North Carolina. Look at the results. All of a sudden, that means candidates who people know locally, identified as a Democrat, knocking on doors in their district. It means messages in rural Ohio or rural Virginia or rural North Carolina about how local public schools are being undermined by the lack of funding from the state, or healthcare costs going up, which is hitting rural areas often more than anywhere else.
Really hard.
Or other things that are out there that these communities feel like are undermining them. Trickle down economics, that's not benefiting almost a single citizen in many of these communities. But if you're not there explaining that, they will be told, well, the reason why we're struggling is some other myth or narrative that isn't true. So what we saw in Virginia when you ran everywhere was higher turnout for the top of the ticket, but messaging everywhere that helps everybody. And what you saw there was not only a win by a governor, you saw massive gains in the state house, and every single corner of Virginia moved in the Democratic direction. Every part of it. And part of it is because you run everywhere. Here's the good news. I think by next week, we will know in Ohio. Now, everyone's got to get their petitions in, but there's been a really hard effort here. I think we will also have a candidate in, I'd say, almost every district. If some people may, it's easy to screw up your petition. So maybe a few will fall short, but we may have one in every district. We'll see. Texas has a candidate in every state house district, which is amazing. Florida had that recently, and hopefully they do it again. But the benefits to everybody, and by the way, to democracy, when everyone in every district feels like they have a choice at a state house level where so much is happening, but two people don't know about it, is enormous. And what I love is that we're seeing this trend, and my hope is that Ohio joins some of the other states in having at least almost every district contested, and knock on wood, maybe every district. It just has huge benefits, and we've tried the other model. So the old model was, that's a waste of money. We need to really only focus on the swing areas. The swing areas will always get more money. We know that. But to zero out half of America with no message and no candidate was a disaster. And I think we're finally correcting for it in many, many states.
For the last few election cycles, I've spent some time in the South, or either in Florida or in Georgia, and kind of largely in rural counties in those places, doing voter protection legal work and related things. And I'll just a little anecdote on the night before Election Day, and in the last presidential election, 2024, I was in Coffee County, Georgia, and I was riding around with the county party chair, who, it's a small county. It's what they call, part of what they call in Georgia, the Black Belt, a heavy concentration of African American voters. And they wanted to get their voters out, and so they do mobilization and going around and knocking on doors. And they did not have the funds or the ability to print their voter rolls. They got no money from the National Party. They had no signs. They were begging me, because I'd been in Atlanta a couple of days before. Could you get signs for us? Could you? It was such a profound misallocation of resources to me that, I mean, a few $100 and a couple of signs would have made a difference in that county, and I suspect many others as well. And at a time when we see certainly the Harris campaign spending, $1 billion on carpet bombing the country with national political, with political ads that nobody watches. I get that it is changing in individual states, some of the ones you've cited, and that's like a really important bottoms up thing. But is there a recognition at the level of the National Party that there needs to be a more sustained organizing between an investment in the rest of the country between cycles?
It's gotten better over time. When I started out when you're the chair of a party, which I was, you're also the DNC. And I won't name names because I don't want to criticize folks. But the first thing I asked when I was chair was, what do they even do for us? Because the answer was almost nothing. I think Tom Perez came in and actually made it better. He did more. He was out helping in some of these areas. Jamie Harrison had been the chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party, so he understood this. And Ken Martin was the chair of Minnesota's party. So I do think they understand it. If you watch them, I think they're investing more. Money is always an issue, but organized in an ongoing way. And just to be clear, because sometimes people roll their eyes and say, oh, what a waste, you can't do this. Of course, the swing big Senate races are going to get most of the money, but it shouldn't be all or nothing. And what I've started to argue about was, to the extent you're saying don't do anything there, that any dollars are a waste, I think, as you're saying, it's completely self-defeating. that getting some dollars out, it's not going to be the same. You don't need to be the same, but to have enough to have a sample ballot or a slate card or a mailer, or to have candidates have enough money that they can run a campaign. You may, Lisa knows this, I started something called Blue Ohio. Blue Ohio is a crowdfunding. We raise money from 1,000 or so monthly donors, and the money goes bottom up to the hardest districts up. We know the people in the swing districts will get the larger support. So we say, wait, you're running in a district that no one's running in 3 terms because it's so gerrymandered? That's what we're looking for. Thank you. We start with them and we help them on up. And again, that's not going to be as much as, the Senate race, but it's enough to get them going so they can run a real campaign. And it's enough to show them that we value them enough that they run in the first place. Because the reason people weren't running anywhere is because they were basically told by the party big shots, oh, it's not important that you run there. We're not going to do anything. Well, why is anyone going to run if their own party tells them we don't care if you run? So what's good is in many states, there is now a changed mindset that there are groups of people, both party and sort of independent groups, saying, thank you for running a tough place. We are here to help, including with some financial support, which you need to go. And so I do think long-term, that shift's very important. I do think it's happening at multiple levels.
You want to build such a good bench, and you're not building a bench of candidates if you're telling people, if you put your name forward, we're going to do absolutely nothing to help you. Yeah. And it is likely going to be a painful process and a humiliating defeat. And nobody's going to pat you on the back and say thank you. And nobody's going to give you even the very basic
Sign me
funds
up.
that you need to be able to.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Why the hell would I do that? I'm not a masochist.
Yeah.
I don't,
Right.
I can do other things to try to make a difference with my time without self-immolating. David, when you're going around and you're talking to people, one of the things that we're hearing a lot about right now is kind of big economic boycott efforts that are coming up, and they're sort of rolling, and sometimes we're not finding out about them with much advance notice. So I'm not sure they're super effective. I keep finding out about them like 2 days after one happened. I'm sure people are looking for things to do to be able to really make an impact. Is that something that you think people will get on board for? And if that is or isn't, do you have other ideas on how we can all be reaching out to folks and engaging them and activating them?
People standing up in any way is really important, but and maybe this will sound self-serving because now I'm on the ballot. I think the most important thing we can do is an absolute wave come November. As big as not just 18, but 06. Huge. That's not just about election wins, but a statement. And so a lot of what I would say folks might do, and we're seeing this in this campaign. I mean, we are seeing for January in the winter we're all dealing with, huge energy. And people are energized by it. And I think right now, taking as much of that energy and saying, let's make sure we have a candidate in every district. If we've got a governor candidate like Dr. Acton, let's start helping, because we're fighting a billionaire. We got to deal with that. Like, he does have that advantage. Making sure that voters are registered, getting registered, watching. A lot of that's nonpartisan work. But I think that the closer we get to November, and being out visible, being out protesting, all that's really important. I've been part of that. If you have some kind of modest showing in November against all that we're seeing, that's a statement for the folks doing some really bad things right now. Just keep doing it. If we have a major push and all of a sudden we're turning Ohio blue, which I think we can do, and we have a chance of winning other states that we don't always think we can win, that's how you really, in the big picture, also, I think, make a huge statement about what Americans are for. They're for the everyday issues that aren't being addressed, and they're for the broader issues. So we too often engage voters just at the end. It's too late for a lot of voters. Like, if they're not showing up consistently, it's because they've decided that voting doesn't matter in their life. And they maybe decided that because it hasn't. So
Right.
those voters
Yeah.
need a longer term conversation. So start organizing your community to have those conversations. This is the most important year for democracy of our lifetimes. I really believe it. And I think starting to channel your energy so it's for that purpose, I think, is really, really important. And there are many, many ways to do it.
I've got 4 kids, all 19 to 29, all voting age, and they are themselves pretty engaged in politics and aware. But so many of their friends, so many of their peers see no interest in it at all. See everyone as they're all as bad as one another, and basically no matter who you vote for, they're effectively the real power sits someplace else, right? It just doesn't matter, right? We've all heard some version of that. And I think you look at, for example, the Biden administration, and they were able to accomplish a lot, but people did not feel it. People did not feel the connection between their vote and policy that changed their lives, even if sometimes they might have been, with a little bit of storytelling, they might have been able to see it, because there certainly were things.
Right.
And in a state like Ohio, where you are probably going to face a Republican-dominated legislature, how do you both ask for somebody's vote and then have the confidence that when you are governing, you will actually be able to get things done that they feel in their lives? Because it feels like that is failing so much.
I mean, I think those of us who are a little older sort of take for granted that everyone thinks democracy is wonderful. And I think it is, but I think if when you talk to someone who's 22 or 24, all they've seen is just absolutely terrible politics. And so when we assume that they are on our same wavelength, that hey, if you vote, and you vote in the right way and your side wins, it's gonna be great for you. We're assuming that they think that, and many of them have not seen that. Think of the world that people born around, 9/11 or after have seen, all of how broken it is, how corrupt it looks, and that often the people who seem the most broken win the elections. And so I think we do have to not assume those things. And it's kind of what I was saying about when we show up too late. We've got to show folks, one, and this is why I think Dr. Acton's such a great candidate. I think a new kind of candidate that's authentic cuts through with younger voters much better than your standard old sort of stereotypical politician. And I do think that's one reason I think she's very strong, is she feels different to all voters, but younger voters will see, oh, that's what I'd like to see in politics. Someone who's real. Yeah. They don't feel that political. They're just trying to help. Those authentic figures are probably better suited for young folks who've seen a very broken politics. But the second one is, and by the way, I also wouldn't assume much. I don't think the younger electorate is as partisan. I think they're looking for answers, but they're not necessarily going to the typical Democratic clubs that like maybe a generation before went to. They're going to all sorts of different groups, and to just try and put them in a partisan bucket also makes a mistake. Even though there may be assumption that many are progressive, I don't think just appealing to sort of party loyalty is a way that you're going to win them over. And this is where I'd say your question is dead on. I think speaking to the immediacy of some of these issues, it breaks my heart to see the what we're seeing around unemployment of college grads, or whether or not they're college grads, just young people. The housing cost issue, the idea that being able to get a house is now decades away from people in their early 20s. I mean, it's just a different world. That's why when they think politics is broken, it's because they're seeing it's not working for them. I mean, so much of the brokenness of politics, they are shouldering, whether it be, higher costs or housing that feels far away, or let's say a couple in their mid-20s gets married, has kids. We talk about all the time how childcare costs exploding.
Brutal.
Massive issue. And in a state like Ohio, by the way, we are one of the worst 2 or 3 in the nation when it comes to affordability of childcare. I was in Steubenville, Ohio the other day, right on the West Virginia border, and I was told that we can't find affordable childcare in Ohio. We have our kids go to West Virginia to get it. That's a shocking thing to hear as a proud Ohioan. So I think to your question, and what I loved about Mikey Sherrill's in the end of her campaign, one thing she did, and she's going to obviously act on it now, is she said an amazing clip. Hey, I'm not just running with a 10-year plan or to write a strongly worded memo. There is a crisis around costs right now, and I'm going to solve it from the moment I get there. And she would list the specific things she was going to take on right away. And that's what we have to do in Ohio. And I think for young people who are seeing a lot of promises that aren't met, I think the kind of less partisan, immediate sort of immediacy and specificity that, hey, we're going to, and this is what Dr. Knack and I talking about, we're going to take on the fact that medical debt is crushing so many families. We've got to do something about childcare. We've got to do something about other costs. I think there is a sense that we need to move in quickly, and we need action and not just sort of your typical sort of 30,000 foot policy that for people who are feeling it immediately, they want answers sooner than that. So that's some of how I break through. But it does start with, I think, authentic figures that can speak to young people in a different way. And in this case, I think that Amy Acton's a great candidate appealing to young people all across the state.
Authenticity is essential, and certainly for the youngest voters. And we're seeing on social media, that's the special sauce, right? It's building trust, seeming authentic. How are you increasing your embrace as a social media personality, needing to be a creator, and Dr. Acton as well, because it's become an essential part of running a successful campaign. And Mikey Sherrill did it really well, and Mondani did it really well, and the Democrats have not traditionally done it as well as the Republicans have. And I think part of that is like this fear of making mistakes, that wanting to just be so tight on message, and not say the wrong thing. What are you doing to embrace that?
One is, I mean, I do think we are both ourselves, and no one can really change that, which helps. But two, I would say that one thing that we're learning this campaign, and I used to say this when I was a chair, people would say, well, how are you going to talk to young people through social media? And I would say, well, let young people lead in doing that. This campaign is actually harnessing younger folks to help us think through and lead how to talk to other younger voters, because a lot of it is actually running a campaign where you empower others who are fans and supporters and say, hey, you can be the messenger and you can be the creator as much as we can. And right now that's actually working very well, that we have a lot of people out there who are spreading the word, explaining why they like Dr. Acton or myself, and they're the ones coming up with the messaging as much as we are. And I think that's a much better way to do it. They're going to figure out much better how to talk to those who they want to win over than we might.
David, that's a great place to stop. Thank you so much. We're excited for to see what happens with your campaign, Acton Pepper for Ohio. You also have a Substack.
Perspectives.
Was it Perspectives?
Yep.
You can say that 5 times fast. And have written a couple of great books, including Laboratories of Autocracy, which we've talked about. So we really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, David.
Appreciate
Always a pleasure. What an amazing conversation. If folks haven't read David's books, both Laboratories of Autocracy and Saving Democracy, I cannot recommend those highly enough. Saving Democracy is wonderful because it really is a how-to manual for things that you can be doing to actually help save democracy between now and the midterms and on after that. And subscribe to Perspectives on Substack. That's David's newsletter. And thank you for joining us on Signal Fire. We will be back here again next Wednesday. Please share, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. We will see you next Wednesday.